They laughed at the old janitor in the boardroom until his truth ended their careers. At exactly 10:17 a.m., the old janitor walked into the company's high-level boardroom, uninvited. They laughed at him. One man even joked, "Did you lose your mop, old man?" Another snorted, "Must have taken a wrong turn at the supply closet." But Otis Carter didn't say a word. He just walked to the table, opened his old leather briefcase, and slid a piece of paper across the shiny wood. By the time he walked out, no one was laughing, because he had just shut the entire company down, and the truth was, he owned it. But this story didn't begin in that boardroom. It started in silence, long before anyone saw Otis as more than the man with the mop. That morning, like every other morning, Otis arrived before sunrise. The hallways of Sterling Corp were quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet he liked. He pushed his cleaning cart down the glossy floors, the wheels squeaking softly. He moved slow, careful, steady. Not because he was weak, but because he was precise. Every movement had a rhythm, a purpose. After nearly 4 decades of doing this, Otis knew every corner of this building better than the men and women who ran it. He knew which doors stuck, which lights buzzed, which cameras had a blind spot. He also knew which executives talked about others behind their backs, and which ones laughed when someone was fired. Otis didn't speak much, but he saw everything. At 5:30 a.m., the building belonged to him. The suits wouldn't arrive for another couple of hours, which meant he could work in peace. It was his time to think. Today, though, Otis wasn't just thinking, he was remembering. He stopped outside the big corner office on the 30th floor, Ryan Sterling's office. The nameplate gleamed like it had something to prove. Otis unlocked the door and stepped inside. The office was spotless, but Otis still went through the motions, emptying the trash, dusting the desk, polishing the windows. He wasn't cleaning, not really. He was looking at the photo on the wall, young Ryan standing proud beside his father, Thomas Sterling, the company's founder. What the photo didn't show was Otis, just out of frame, cropped out on purpose. He had been there that day too. The ribbon cutting. The launch of Sterling Corp. Otis had believed in the dream, believed in Thomas. Believed in the idea that hard work mattered more than skin color or background. But that dream didn't last long. Thomas died suddenly, and Ryan took over. The man who once called Otis Mr. Carter now barely made eye contact. His polite smiles faded. His father's warmth died with him, and the building changed too. People stopped seeing Otis. Or maybe they never had. They started walking through him instead of around him. They asked him to clean things that were already clean. They blamed him for smells that weren't his. Sometimes they laughed right in his face. Other times, behind his back. They didn't know he had an engineering degree. They didn't know he once invested everything he had to save this company. They didn't know he still had the papers and the power. They just saw the uniform, the mop, the old man who didn't belong in their world. But Otis remembered everything. Every broken promise, every late-night shift, every time they talked over him like he was furniture. Today, that weight felt heavier. He had overheard something the day before. 2 executives in the bathroom laughing about cutting jobs. 400 gone, one of them had said. Start with the low-level people. They won't fight back. Otis had wrung out his cloth, silent as ever. But something inside him had started to shift. After he finished in the executive offices, he went down to the 3rd floor, his favorite closet, the one with the weak vent and flickering light. It was the only place no one bothered him. He sat on his small folding stool, pulled out his lunch, and opened his worn leather bag. Inside wasn't just a sandwich. There was a folded letter and a certificate, signed by Thomas Sterling. It had waited 35 years in silence. Just like Otis. Now, The time for silence was over. He didn't want revenge. He wanted respect. He didn't want to punish anyone. He wanted to protect the workers, the real people, the ones with kids and bills and dreams. He packed his things slowly, and as the sun rose outside, Otis stood up straighter than he had in years, because the next time he walked into that boardroom, he wouldn't be carrying a mop. He'd be carrying the truth, and it was about to change everything. The next morning came with rain, not the kind that poured hard, but the slow, stubborn kind. It tapped softly against the windows of Sterling Corp like it was waiting to be let inside. At 5:12 a.m., Otis Carter walked through the front doors. Same as always. The security guard barely looked up from his coffee. He just gave a small nod, the kind you give to someone you've seen so often they've become part of the building. Otis returned the nod. But today, his cart was a little lighter, and his walk a little slower, but not because of age, because of what he was carrying. Inside the side pocket of his cleaning cart, wrapped in a plastic folder, was the truth. Share certificates, a trust agreement, and a signed letter from Thomas, Sterling himself. The documents had waited over 3 decades. Now, they sat quietly between cleaning spray and fresh gloves. As he pushed the cart into the elevator, Otis looked up at the lights above. Floor 30, the top. Today would be the last time they'd look at him like he didn't belong. But before that moment could come, the building had to wake up. He started where he always did, restocking paper towels, emptying bins, polishing glass. Floor by floor, he moved like a shadow, quiet, invisible. At 6:41 a.m., the first voice cut through the quiet. "Oh, just you," said Patricia Wilson from HR, nearly bumping into him near the executive pantry. She pressed her hand to her chest like she'd seen a ghost. "You startled me." "Morning, Miss Wilson," Otis said gently, stepping aside. She didn't say it, but her eyes said it for her. He wasn't supposed to be here yet, not this close to the executive lounge, not without being called. Someone spilled coffee in the conference room, she said sharply. "Make sure it's spotless. There's a board meeting this morning." She turned to leave, then stopped. "And Otis, the smell from the third-floor supply closet? Still too strong. Please take your breaks elsewhere. Executives have noticed." Otis gave a quiet nod. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't wait for a reply. As her heels clicked away down the hallway, Otis stood still. His expression didn't change. But inside, something did. Because that supply closet? That was the only place he ever had peace. That was the only place he ever sat down. A man his age shouldn't have to eat standing over a sink. But they didn't think about that. To them, he was part of the furniture. 30 minutes later, Otis was in the executive bathroom, polishing the mirrors. He was finishing up when 2 younger executives walked in, deep in conversation. "I'm telling you," one said, "Ryan's not going to blink. 400 layoffs, just like that." "Lower floor people only?" the other asked, adjusting his collar in the mirror. Otis had just cleaned. "Naturally, can't cut the decision makers. Gotta keep the board happy." Otis kept wiping, quiet. One of them glanced over. "Hey, how old do you think this one is?" he said with a smirk. "Pushing 70, the other replied. "Should be a law against that. Age limit on mop duty." Otis said nothing. He just wrung out the cloth. The taller man raised his voice. "Isn't that right, old-timer? Still love the smell of bleach?" Otis turned toward them, his voice calm. "Bathroom's clean, gentlemen." The younger one gave a mock bow. Thank heaven for small miracles. Then, as Otis walked to leave, the taller man stepped into his path. "Oh, and there's a mess in the conference room. Spilled coffee. Again. Be a good man and get to it, yeah?" The word boy didn't leave his mouth, but it hovered there. Otis nodded, moving past him with the same grace he always had. But his heart was full of names they never bothered to learn, full of insults they thought he didn't hear, full of days spent watching this company become colder, sharper, meaner than Thomas ever intended. The final straw wasn't one big thing. It was 1,000 small ones. By noon, Otis stood in the basement locker room. He opened the locker. There it was, the battered leather briefcase. He hadn't touched it in years. But he never stopped checking that it was still there. He lifted it gently, not like paper, like a memory. Inside were the truths no one ever asked about. A share certificate, signed by Thomas Sterling. 51% ownership, Otis Carter. A trust agreement. Filed and recorded, a handwritten letter. My dear friend Otis, you believed in me when no one else would. He ran his thumb across the faded ink. He didn't need revenge. He didn't even need a spotlight. He just needed them to see him, not as a janitor, not as a problem, but as a man. A man who helped build this company. A man who was done being silent. A man who still had power in his hands. That's when he zipped the briefcase shut and started walking, not to clean, but to speak. Because when the board meeting started the next morning, they had no idea the man with the mop was about to shut it all down. It was quiet on the 30th floor. Too quiet. Inside the executive boardroom, men and women in expensive suits sat around a polished table. Crystal water glasses, laptops open, folders labeled Strategic Workforce Reduction. They all knew what. That meant layoffs, hundreds of them. But no one called it that out loud. Ryan Sterling, the CEO, stood at the head of the table. He wore a dark navy suit and the smug confidence of a man used to being obeyed. He tapped his finger on the table. Let's keep it brief, he said. Phase 1, 387 positions eliminated, mostly lower-level staff. No severance for short-term employees. PR is drafting something soft about realignment. Some board members shifted in their seats. Martha, the only one who had worked with Thomas Sterling, frowned. That's almost 20% of our workforce. Ryan shrugged. They'll find other jobs. Or they won't. Either way, we save millions. A few quiet chuckles followed. That's when the door opened, and everything stopped. Otis Carter stood in the doorway. No cleaning cart, no gloves, just a plain, slightly faded gray suit and a briefcase held firmly in both hands. Someone near the back of the table muttered, "Is that the janitor?" Another snickered. "He dressin' for a promotion?" Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Carter, this is a private meeting." Otis didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, slow but steady. "I know," he said, "but I have something to say." Ryan waved toward the assistant near the door. "Get him out of here. We don't need the maintenance staff interrupting serious company business." "I am company business," Otis replied. The room went silent again. Ryan stood straighter. "You're a janitor, Mr. Carter. You've been here a long time. I'll give you that. But if you're worried about losing your job, this is not the way to go about it." Otis walked to the head of the table and gently placed his briefcase on the table. He opened it slowly. One by one, he pulled out documents, a certificate, a letter, a trust agreement. Then he slid the first paper across the table to Ryan. The logo on top was unmistakable. Sterling Corporation. Founding share certificate, 51% ownership, signed by Thomas Sterling, issued to Otis Carter. Ryan froze. He blinked, then laughed, too loudly. "Is this a prank?" he scoffed, glancing around the table. "Did someone put the janitor up to this?" "No." "Prank?" Otis said quietly. "I've had this for 35 years. Ryan picked up the document, scanned it. His smirk began to fade. Walter, the CFO, leaned forward and took the papers. His face went pale. "These signatures are real," he said. "The stamp, the serial ID, the SEC registration, it all checks out." Martha took the letter. Her breath caught as she read it. "Otis, This is from Thomas, in his handwriting. He gave you control of the company? Otis nodded once. He didn't just give it. I invested everything I had back when no one else believed in him. I gave him my life savings when banks turned him away. A younger board member shook his head. But you've been working as a janitor all these years? Why? Otis looked at each person around the table. Because America in 1988 wasn't ready for a black man co-owning a tech company. Investors wouldn't back us. Thomas and I agreed. I'd stay in the background. I chose maintenance because it gave me access to the entire company. I could see everything, hear everything. He paused. I've been watching ever since, watching what this place became, watching Thomas's dream get twisted. Ryan slammed his hand on the table. This is madness. A mop man can't walk in here and just take over. I don't want your job, Otis interrupted softly. But I do want to stop you. He turned to the rest of the board. I call for an emergency vote, cancel the layoffs, begin a full financial audit, effective immediately. Walter looked at Ryan, then at the others. Slowly, he raised his hand. Then Martha, then another, and another. Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Otis stood tall, calm, dignified, unshaken. They had laughed at him for years. They never saw him, never heard him. But now, they couldn't look away. He wasn't just the janitor. He was the owner. For a moment after the vote, no one moved. Ryan Sterling stood frozen at the head of the table, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Across from him, Otis. Carter calmly closed his briefcase. The same briefcase they'd all ignored for years. The same hands they'd watched empty trash cans. We're now signing boardroom decisions. You can't be serious, Ryan said finally, his voice shaking. He's the janitor. No one answered, because now they were looking at Otis differently. Not like background furniture, not like a ghost in a uniform, but like a man who had just changed everything. Otis didn't speak. He simply gathered the papers, placed them back in his case, and gave a small nod to the room. Then, as quietly as he'd entered, he walked out. But the silence behind him? It was no longer filled with laughter. It was filled with fear. The news hit the company like a lightning bolt. By noon, whispers turned into full-blown conversations. By 3 p.m., the story was trending on internal forums. By 6 p.m., someone had leaked it to the press. Janitor reveals he owns tech giant after 35 years in shadows. Nobody could believe it, but it was true. Otis Carter, the man who mopped their floors, the man who knew which vending machines always jammed, the man who always remembered birthdays, even when no one else did. He owned 51% of Sterling Corporation, and nobody saw it coming. Except Otis. Ryan, meanwhile, was losing control. And fast. That night, he called an emergency meeting with his legal team. We need to fight this, he barked. Challenge the trust, dispute the documents, get the media off this story. His lawyers looked nervous. Ryan, one of them said carefully, the paperwork is clean. SEC filings, time-stamped agreements, it's bulletproof. Your father really did give him controlling shares. Ryan's voice cracked. He was a janitor. He was your father's partner, the lawyer replied. That makes him your equal. Or more. Ryan turned away, his face flushed. Then, we bury him. We leak something. Smear him. Make him look crazy. But they all knew the truth. Otis didn't need to speak loud. His silence had already spoken volumes, and the world was listening. The next morning, Otis returned to work. Not as the janitor, as the man in charge. But he didn't arrive in a limousine. He didn't wear a designer suit. He came on the bus, wearing the same gray jacket, carrying the same briefcase. People stared. Some smiled awkwardly. Others looked away, unsure what to say. But Otis greeted everyone the same way he always had. "Good morning," with a gentle smile, like nothing had changed, even though everything had. He didn't go straight to the CEO's office. He went to the break room, sat down with the night shift team, listened to them complain about the broken microwave, promised to get it replaced, because that's who Otis was. Even now, he knew the top floors didn't matter if the bottom floors were broken. By noon, the company cafeteria was full. Word had spread fast. Otis was holding his first all-staff meeting. No fancy emails, no video presentation. Just Otis, standing in front of a podium that looked too big for him. The room went quiet as he stepped forward. He looked out at the crowd. Engineers, accountants, security guards, interns, janitors. And then he said quietly, "My name is Otis Carter. Until yesterday, I was the janitor here." He let that hang in the air. I still am, in some ways. I still care about this building, still care about its people. I still see the stains nobody else sees. I still hear what's said when people think no one's listening. People shifted in their seats. I was given 51% of this company by Thomas Sterling, the founder, over 30 years ago. Not as a gift, but as a thank you. Because when no one else believed in him, I did. I gave him everything I had, and he gave me partnership. He paused, took a breath. I stayed silent out of respect. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not when I hear about 400 people losing their jobs. Not when I see the heart of this company turning cold. He looked around the room. "You don't have to believe in me, but I promise you this, I believe in you. And I believe in what this company can be again." There was silence, then someone clapped, then another, then the whole room stood, and for the first time in decades, Otis Carter was seen, but not everyone was clapping. On the 30th floor, Ryan Sterling stood at the window, fists clenched, watching. The crowd gathered below. He wasn't done. He wouldn't go quietly. He would fight, and he would do anything to take back what he thought was his, even if it meant burning it all down. The applause still echoed in the halls when Otis stepped away from the podium. He didn't linger for handshakes or congratulations. That wasn't his style. He simply nodded once at the crowd and walked down the side steps, quiet, as always, calm, as always, but just 2 floors above, chaos had already begun. Ryan Sterling was on the phone. Not just one call, but 5 at once. Legal, PR, investors, foreign contacts, and someone from the private bank that managed Sterling Corp's operational accounts. "You freeze it now," Ryan hissed into the phone. "I don't care if it's unethical. Lock every account connected to payroll, pending ownership resolution. Call it a dispute. Call it whatever you want." The man on the other end hesitated. "Ryan, that'll shut down payments to thousands of people." "Good," Ryan snapped. "Let Carter explain that when paychecks bounce." That afternoon, the accounting department noticed it first. The payroll system wasn't responding. Then vendor payments failed. Then travel reimbursements. Then the pension system. Everything was locked. Frozen. Word spread fast. By 3 p.m., department heads were panicking. By 3:15, employees were whispering in elevators. By 3:30, someone broke down crying in the break room. Otis heard the news just as he was walking into his new office, the one that used to belong to Ryan. He had barely sat down when Jake Wilson from accounting came in, pale as paper. "Mr. Carter," Jake said breathlessly. "Ryan used his banking contacts. He froze the company's money. We can't access payroll or anything." Otis blinked once, but his voice stayed level. "Are we sure?" Jake nodded. "I double-checked. Every major account is locked until a court decides who owns the company." Otis didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. "Have we missed any payments yet?" he asked quietly. "No, sir," Jake replied. Next payroll is in 4 days, but vendors are already asking questions. Otis nodded once. Get Martha. Get legal. Get Walter. We're meeting in 10. Downstairs, employees were glued to their phones. Some were pacing. Others were crying. The whispers turned darker. We won't get paid. They're going to sell the company. Otis isn't ready for this. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, a new rumor spread. Logan Matthews, Ryan's right-hand man, was calling top employees one by one, not just offering them jobs, offering them better ones. At a new startup Ryan had formed overnight, he was stealing the best minds. And he was doing it while Otis was still trying to unlock the doors. In the top floor meeting room, Otis listened without interrupting. Walter was sweating. This is a strategic ambush, he muttered. Ryan wants panic. He wants employees. To blame you. Martha nodded. If the workforce turns, the board could be pressured to reinstate him. Let him have his startup, Walter added. He's only taking the ones loyal to him anyway. Otis leaned back in his chair, looking at each of them. What's the worst-case scenario? He asked simply. Jake answered first. If we don't pay people in 4 days, we lose trust. People will walk. Lawsuits could follow. And what do we need? Otis asked. Access to working capital, Walter said, just to bridge us a few weeks. Not forever, Jake added, just until the freeze is lifted. Otis nodded. I'll handle it. They looked confused. What do you mean? Martha asked. Otis stood. I mean, I'll handle it. And then he walked out. By 6 p.m., every employee had received an email. Subject, emergency all-staff meeting, 7 p.m. Most assumed the worst, but when they gathered in the auditorium, Otis walked out on stage alone. No lawyers, no slides, no dramatic music, just Otis, standing in the same suit he wore when he first revealed the truth. The crowd was silent. Some crossed their arms. Others looked down. A few looked angry. Otis looked at them all. I know you're scared, he began. I know you've heard the rumors. That payroll is frozen. That vendors are cutting ties. That Ryan Sterling is starting a new company and trying to take you with him. He paused. I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, our accounts are frozen. Yes, Ryan is trying to hurt us. But I didn't come here to ask for patience. I came to give you a promise. He held up a small folded paper. This is a personal guarantee I just signed with the bank. I've put up my home, my savings, my retirement. Gasps rippled through the room. Otis's voice didn't shake. I've secured enough money to make sure every one of you is paid on time. No delays, no excuses. He looked down for a second, then back up. This company has given me purpose for 35 years. Now I want it to give all of you something more. Stability, respect, a future. I won't let it fall apart now. For a second, no one moved. Then a voice shouted, You put up your house? Otis nodded. I've lived in it for 40 years, but it's just wood and bricks. You're the foundation I care about. And then the room erupted. Not just clapping. People stood, cheered, some even cried. The janitor hadn't just cleaned the floors, he was cleaning up a broken system, and somehow, against everything, he was winning. But Ryan Sterling wasn't done. Not yet, and his next move would be the dirtiest one of all. The building was quiet again. It always got that way after dark. But this silence, it was different. Heavy. Like the walls were holding their breath. Otis sat alone in the CEO's office, long after most had gone, home. The city lights blinked softly through the window behind him, but he wasn't looking outside. He was reading something. Not a contract. Not a financial report. A letter. It was handwritten. Old. The ink had faded in some places, but the words were clear. It was from Thomas Sterling. Otis had kept it in his briefcase all these years. He had read it many times before. But tonight it felt heavier. You were there when no one else believed in me, Otis. You saw the dream. You saw the people. If I'm gone before my time, I need you to protect this company. Not just its name, but its soul. Otis folded the Y, letter slowly, and placed it back in the drawer. That promise was about to be tested again, because trouble wasn't done knocking. At 2:43 a.m., a silent alarm was triggered in the building's server room. No one noticed it right away. No doors had been forced open. No cameras had been broken. Whoever did it had a badge, an old one, a master key, and the code. It wasn't until 7:06 a.m. that Jake Wilson from accounting found out. He had come in early, hoping to catch up on reports. But something felt off. The server response was slower. A few access logs were missing. Then, a small window popped up, just for a second. A flash of code. Jake wasn't IT, but he knew enough. That wasn't normal. He ran to Michael in the tech department. By 8 a.m., they were in a panic. By 8:15, Otis was called to the basement, and by 8:30, he knew Ryan had made his next move. The server had been tampered with, not just accessed, booby-trapped. Someone had left behind a kill switch, a small piece of hidden code that, if activated, would wipe years of company records, contracts, financials. Emails, HR files gone in seconds. Otis looked at the screen, then at Michael. "Can we stop it?" he asked calmly. Michael nodded. "We already did. We isolated the code and traced it. Whoever installed it didn't know we keep triple backups. Old backups, physical ones, locked in storage." Jake added, "And the code was written on one machine only. Logan's laptop." Otis exhaled slowly. "Ryan's people." Jake hesitated. "We also traced the login time. It happened while Logan was still technically on payroll." Otis nodded. "Get me Martha, and legal, and call the FBI." Jake blinked. "The FBI?" "Yes," Otis said quietly. "We're not talking about corporate politics anymore. This is criminal." At 10:17 a.m., two men in black suits walked through the Sterling Corp front doors, federal agents. Their faces were unreadable, but they carried weight, the kind that made people step aside. They went straight to the 30th floor. Otis met them in the hallway. "Mr. Carter?" one asked. "Special Agent Simmons, Cybercrime Division. We received your files. You were right to call." Otis nodded and led them into the conference room. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize the situation. He just told the truth and handed over the evidence. While they reviewed it, another message came through the lobby intercom. Logan Matthews had just tried to leave the building with a company laptop. Security stopped him. The agents stepped in. And moments later, Logan Matthews, Ryan Sterling's closest ally, was led out in handcuffs. Employees gathered near the windows. Some watched in shock. Some whispered. Others stared silently. It was the first arrest Sterling Corp had ever seen. But it wouldn't be the last. By 3 p.m., the news had broken. Sterling Corp executive arrested in cybercrime investigation. Sources say former CEO under federal scrutiny. Ryan saw the headlines from his penthouse. He threw a glass across the room. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the heir, the legacy, the name. But now the name, Otis Carter, was trending online. Now employees were rallying around the janitor who became CEO. Ryan made one last call. To Otis. Otis was in the break room when his phone buzzed. He didn't recognize the number. He answered anyway. "Carter," Ryan said coolly. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." "I know," Otis replied quietly. "It's just starting," Ryan chuckled. "You're playing a dangerous game. You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. but I'm offering you a way out." "I'm listening," Otis said. 15 million, Ryan said flatly. "Clean, offshore. You sign over your shares and walk away. You can retire wherever you want. No headlines, no lawyers, just peace." Otis didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "Let me ask you something, Ryan," he said softly. "When's the last time you earned 15 million without stepping on someone?" Ryan didn't answer. "Because I'd rather lose everything," Otis continued, "than take your dirty piece." Ryan growled, "You'll regret this." Otis didn't blink. "I already regret staying silent this long." Then he ended the call. That night, Otis didn't go home early. He stayed to help wipe down the cafeteria tables. Old habits. Frank, the maintenance lead, walked by and grinned. "You know you don't have to do that anymore, right?" he joked. Otis smiled. "I know." But he kept wiping. Because he understood something Ryan never did. The most powerful man in the building is the one who still listens when the room goes quiet. And right now, the whole world was listening. Because justice was finally knocking, and Otis Carter was holding the door wide open. The headlines hit like thunder. Ryan Sterling arrested at penthouse in corporate fraud case. FBI confirms Sterling Corp ex-CEO linked to cybercrime and embezzlement. Whistleblower was the janitor, who owned the company all along. TV anchors debated it. Podcasts picked it apart. Social media exploded. The janitor had been the boss the entire time. It sounded like fiction, but it was true. And Otis Carter didn't have time to celebrate. He was too busy cleaning up the damage Ryan had left behind, not with a mop, with truth, with patience, with decisions that lifted people up instead of pushing them down. The day Ryan was led out in handcuffs, the building didn't cheer. It didn't clap. It went quiet. People watched from windows, hallways, balconies. Otis didn't stand at the front. He stood at the back, just watching. A security guard whispered, "He doesn't look so big now." Otis didn't respond. He didn't need to, because power doesn't need to raise its voice, especially when it's real. That afternoon, Otis called a meeting with his leadership team. Not to gloat, not to make speeches, just to get to work. Martha, Jake, Patricia, and others were seated around the table. "I want a full audit report published publicly," Otis said. "We don't hide mistakes. We learn from them." "Agreed," Martha nodded. "And what about the investors who pulled back during the panic?" "Invite them back," Otis replied. "But this time they invest in the whole company, not just the top floors." Jake raised his hand. "What about hiring? The job boards are flooded. People want in now." Otis smiled slightly. "Then let's open the doors wider than ever before." He paused. "And one more thing. I want every employee's name, from maintenance to management, added to the company credits on our next product launch." Patricia blinked. "You mean, like in the official press release?" "No," Otis said. "I mean carved, on the wall, in the lobby, permanently." Weeks passed, then months. And slowly, Sterling Corp began to transform, not just in numbers, but in feeling. The top floor office, Otis turned it into a mentorship space. The executive cafeteria, now a shared lounge for all departments. The supply closet on the third floor, it had a new plaque on the door. Sometimes the smallest rooms hold the biggest truths. The maintenance staff received the biggest raise in company history, not because they complained, but because they deserved it. A new program offered tuition help to every employee willing to study. Otis personally reviewed the first 10 applications. One janitor applied for night school to study coding. "Reminds me of someone," Otis said with a soft grin. 1 year later, the building looked different. Not in design, in energy. People nodded, to each other in elevators now. Names were remembered. ideas were heard. And on that anniversary morning, Otis arrived early, as he always had. He walked through the front doors just after dawn, not in a suit, in a sweater. And a name badge that still said Otis, founder, and facilities retired underneath. Frank from maintenance smiled when he saw him. "You back for more trash cans, boss?" Otis chuckled. "Nope, just here for the unveiling." Frank tilted his head. "You nervous?" Otis looked around the lobby, the shining floors, the busy team, the laughter from the break room. "No," he said. "Not anymore." At noon, the entire company gathered in the central atrium. A large black cloth covered a new display near the front entrance. Martha took the mic. Exactly 1 year ago, a man walked into a boardroom and was laughed at. She looked out at the crowd. But today, we're unveiling something that will make sure that man and his story are never forgotten. She motioned to Otis. He stepped forward. He didn't make a speech. He simply nodded at Frank. Frank pulled the cloth away, and beneath it stood a life-sized glass case. Inside was Otis's old janitor uniform, neatly pressed, a little faded, but full of quiet pride. Next to it, etched in bronze, were the words, "Never judge a person by their position. Sometimes the one cleaning your office owns the building. Otis Carter, co-founder, Sterling Corp." The crowd clapped. Some wiped their eyes, but Otis didn't cry. He just smiled, because for the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not as the janitor, not as the miracle, but as the man who never gave up. Later that evening, Otis stood alone in the original lab, the one where Thomas used to tinker. He looked at the old workbench, the faded sketches, the framed photo now restored to its full version, with all three of them in it. Thomas, Ryan, Otis. "Funny," he whispered. "I stayed in the background for decades. And now, everyone wants to hear what I think." He chuckled softly. Then he looked at the plaque again. It didn't say CEO. It didn't say boss. It just said founder. That was enough. That was the truth. Because the janitor didn't just shut down a company full of greed. He rebuilt it. And more than that, he reminded the world that dignity doesn't wear a title. It walks in silence. It listens when others don't. And sometimes, it holds the keys to the whole building. All it needs is the right moment to open the door